For more on this now, we're joined by Mark Humphrey-Jenner, Associate Professor of Finance at the University of New South Wales Business School. Welcome back to the programme, Mark. Now, oil prices are under pressure once again. Are we experiencing fears of oversupply or disrupted shipments?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me again. And oil is in an interesting situation here because, well, with Venezuela effectively seeing this change in leadership, possibly more oil supply could come online down the track. However, probably not immediately, which is why the oil price only went down between 0.6% and 1%, depending on exactly which oil you're looking at, Brent versus West Texas and the like. In any case, looking at Venezuela, they produce just under 1 million barrels per day, so just under about 1% of the world's production. And they export about 500,000 barrels per day, so it isn't in the large scale relative to other countries like Saudi Arabia. However, Venezuela does have the world's largest oil reserves, which suggests that Venezuela could produce more oil if companies have confidence that they can go into Venezuela and not have their assets expropriated. And that's going to be a big if, and also that won't occur immediately. The other aspect to consider about this, and possibly one of the reasons we have this muted reaction with oil prices, is some Russian oil had gone through Venezuela to then be re-exported. So with the United States effectively disrupting that even more than they'd already done, that will also influence oil supply a little bit. But a lot of the focus has really been on Venezuelan production.
Right, and gold is also back up after retreating from record highs at the end of last year. How much is that driven by geopolitical tensions?
Certainly, gold is interesting. So up just under 2% as at the last look for this. And indeed, when I was walking around Sydney in Australia, there were queues outside gold bullion stores. So certainly there's a lot of interest in gold, a lot of retail interest in particular, but certainly that will filter through into institutional interest, which is why we see the market prices move so much. Now, part of this is just generally when there's uncertainty, people will shift toward gold as effectively a safe haven there. However, gold is continuing this upward swing that it has seen throughout 2025. So to some extent, there's momentum in that carrying forward. To some extent, it's also the just global uncertainty that's permeating. And to some extent, although this would not be the primary driver right now in the latest 24 hours, there are continued fears about inflation, admittedly not necessarily in the United States, but globally in some markets, Australia, to some extent the European Union, areas like that, where gold to some extent is seen as a bit of a hedge as well. But the latest movements really are the geopolitical tensions.
Right, and Venezuela has been suffering for years under US sanctions. Could we see the end of those sanctions, or will this political turmoil plunge the Venezuelan economy further down?
It certainly will be interesting to see. A lot of it will depend on exactly what the United States does with Venezuela, and that is a little bit unclear at the moment. President Trump indicated that the US would run Venezuela. What that exactly means isn't clear, because then Marco Rubio slightly walked that back, suggesting that the United States would try to use leverage and pressure to get Venezuela to act in a way that is more friendly. So exactly what shapes up with Venezuela, we'll see. But Venezuela certainly had been in an economic collapse really throughout Maduro's rule, but in reality, under Hugo Chavez as well, it was an economic dumpster fire. So having some form of movement can only be a good thing. The problem, of course, is it looks like the deputy vice president or the vice president rather, it looks like she's tried to claim leadership in Venezuela, and she is clearly going to be just as bad as Maduro or Chavez because she has been there for just as long. So if she is the one who takes the reins, then we could just see more of the same. Many Venezuelans, many of whom have been exiled or fled Venezuela, are certainly hoping that Venezuela gets its act together, but it's too early to really tell that at the moment.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Mark Humphrey-Jenner in Sydney, thank you very much as always.
Thanks so much for having me.